Remember, as a youth pastor, one day I got a call from the father of a 13-year-old girl that was in my youth group. And he told me that he had caught her shoplifting. And this was the first time she'd ever did that, and he didn't know what to do, and he was a single dad, so I thought maybe he just wants me to be the bad guy, which doesn't bother me. I'll do that. So a few hours later, the two of them came into my office to discuss it. And apparently he didn't tell her ahead of time why he was bringing her to my office. So when I brought up the subject, she just started bawling. And the little girl just like crying all over my office. And on one hand, I was really surprised when he told me what she had done, because this was the sweetest, bubbliest little girl that I had ever met. And she was just like always so cheerful and upbeat and happy. But on the other hand, she's 13. And 13-year-olds aren't exactly known for their judgments. But so as she's like crying and I'm trying to talk to her about this, I'm like, so why did you take it? I don't know, because I wanted it. Oh, there you go. Perfect. That's perfectly understandable. Go ahead and keep it then, because that justifies your actions, right? Because I want it. And so by the end of the conversation, I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do now? And she just stares at me with this blank look on her face. I don't know. I'm like, well, I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to take it you're going to go back to the store, and you're going to find the manager, and you're going to give them the ring, and you're going to confess what you did, and you're going to apologize to them. And this girl thought that she was going to jail. But sure enough, her dad took her to the store, and I think based off of the trauma of that experience, and she didn't get arrested, but I don't think she ever shoplifted again from having to go through all of that. But so this week we're in Exodus chapter 20, verse 15, and we are on the 8th commandment. You shall not steal, right? You shall not steal. I don't know how much there is to say about this. It seems pretty self-explanatory, right? If you're a thief, stop. If you're thinking about stealing something, stop. There you go. But I've still got half an hour to go, so we got to come up with some more to say. Right? Essentially, what it comes down to, if it doesn't belong to you, don't take it, because it's not yours. So I thought it'd be helpful to kind of walk through some of the other laws that are in the Old Testament, because remember, the 10 Commandments are not just all by themselves. They're the first 10 out of an entire series of laws. And I think there's 2 points that I want to point out before we get to those. The first is that these laws were given specifically to the nation of Israel at that point in time. We are not the nation of Israel, so these are not legally binding on us. However, when we understand why they're given, it is helpful to see how we're supposed to live. The second is that I don't want to give the impression that if you just don't steal and you're a good person, then that's somehow good enough. Because being a good moral person is not what gets you into heaven. Believing that Jesus died for your sins and rose from the dead is what gets you into heaven. But the result of that, when we are forgiven of our sins, the result should be that we want to please God. But unfortunately, so many people that claim to be Christians have lost track of this. And many churches they don't preach the gospel, they just preach morals. And morals are important, but they're not what saves us. But we are still supposed to be good moral people as a result of what God has done for us. So when we look at some of these laws coming mostly out of Exodus chapter 22, 23, and then in Deuteronomy, I think it's like 23, 24, 25 is where most of these are found, which is the laws they seem really boring, but again, when we look at them, there's actually a lot that we can learn from them. And so there's I think we can break these laws into 2 general categories. The first would be the loss of private property. Now, most of the examples that are listed through here in the law deal with animals, like taking or losing animals, because we have to remember that these laws were given 3,500 years ago, and it was an agricultural society that they were in. But I think it's pretty easy to see how we can look at the ideas behind these laws and see how they would still apply to our lives today as we become better followers of Jesus. But so obviously the Old Testament law prohibits stealing, but it says elsewhere that the punishment for stealing is that you have to repay double the value. You steal a goat, you have to repay two, or you have to give that person back 2 goats. If you don't have the money to pay back the person that you stole from, you have to work for them as an indentured servant until you pay off the amount that you took from them with a maximum of 7 years worth of work. If you damage someone else's property, usually or specifically what's listed here is if somebody else's animal comes onto your property and falls into a pit and dies, or if your animal gores one of their animals, you have to pay the full value of the property that was damaged. Seems pretty fair. If you find your neighbor's animal is loose, you have to take it back to them. And if you don't know who it belongs to, then you bring it to your property and you take care of it until they come looking for it. So it's the idea of not only don't take other people's property, but we are expected to respect and to take care of other people's property when it is necessary. Here's an interesting one. It says, when you're walking through your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, but you cannot put it in your bag. And that, in the context of that, right, back then they didn't have welfare programs. So what they would do is that when they would harvest all of their crops, they were, whatever was left after the first pass through, they were not supposed to go back in for the second time through and pick up everything else. But that way, all of the poor people and people traveling through would be able to come in and help themselves to whatever was left. It was kind of their social program kind of thing to help the needy. And so if you were traveling through, you are permitted to basically take grapes or grain or whatever you're doing and eat as much as you want as you're passing through. But the moment you start collecting it and putting it into your bag, that's when you cross the line into stealing. And so the idea behind that is essentially don't take advantage of other people's generosity. Right? We see that all the time. I know it's very hard when you're trying to be generous and then people come and lie about what they're doing and take more than they should, right? So we're not supposed to do that. The other category of ways that we see stealing in the Old Testament laws would be what I'll call unfair business practices. So for one, you're prohibited from moving your neighbor's landmark. I don't know if anybody's ever got up in the middle of the night and moved their neighbor's fence over a few feet. I'm assuming that probably doesn't happen too often, but the idea of, we're not supposed to cut corners. We're not supposed to, cheat people out of little things when they're not looking. You're not allowed to charge your brother's interest, right? So if you loan money to family members, you're not supposed to charge them interest. You can charge money to other people, but not your own family. That they consider that stealing. Another one is workers are to be paid the same day for their work. Now, if you have employees or you pay people, chances are you don't pay them every day, but I'm assuming you do have a contract with that person and you are morally obligated to keep that contract and pay them for the amount of work that they do as often as was agreed upon when you hired them. Another one is, we're not to have 2 different kinds of weights or measures. And this is in the context of bartering and trading. So say I'll trade you, if you give me 5 chickens, I'll give you 3 pieces of silver. I have no idea how much chickens are worth in silver. Just totally pulled that up off the top of my head. But they would have scales, and you'd put the silver on this. And so if you want 3 ounces of silver, then I would have weights that I know equal 3 ounces. And that's how we'd measure how much silver is to be traded. But it was a common practice and still kind of is today that the idea that, so it's supposed to be 3 ounces, but really it's 3.5. So I'm cheating you out of that. And I think we've all seen and heard of people and businesses trying to swindle people and trick people and cheat people out of money, like your stereotypical like car salesman, right? They're not going to tell you when there's problems, that kind of stuff. I say that my father-in-law is a car salesman, but right. But all of that is considered under stealing, right? All of that is morally wrong and prohibited under the Old Testament law. And so, like I said, I'm assuming you probably nobody carries around weights to measure out and put on a scale when you trade something. I'm assuming you probably don't have to worry, most of you don't have to worry about your neighbor's animals falling into a hole in your yard. Well, some of you do, but I forgot, we do live out in the middle of nowhere and we have rednecks here. Right, it is easy to see how the principles and the morals behind these do very easily transfer over into our lives. And there's lots of other things that would be considered stealing that aren't specifically mentioned in the Old Testament. For example, stealing intellectual property, such as claiming somebody else's ideas or words as your own. That's called plagiarism. Like if you're in college, you can actually get kicked out of college just for citing somebody else's work without giving them credit. You have things like stealing your employer's time. I had a guy that I used to work with that says you always poop on company time. But that could be considered stealing. Right? If you are doing personal work during company time, right? That's stealing. They are giving you money, but you're not doing the work that you're supposed to be. That's part of stealing. Now they're all cracking up because I said poop from the pulpit. I'm sorry. Stealing someone's reputation. That's an interesting one. If you steal money from somebody, right? You take $100, you give them the $100 back, and everything's right. But if you steal somebody's reputation by spreading lies about them or gossiping about them, chances are that will never be able to be fully restored. So that's a serious one. And then everyone's favorite, cheating on your taxes. Now I know nobody likes paying taxes, but Jesus said that we have to pay our taxes, right? He said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. So if you sell a vehicle for $5,000 and you write it down and you say that you only sold it for $3,000, so you only have to pay taxes on $3,000 instead of $5,000, that is technically stealing, right? God sees all of that. And so there's so many other things that we could add into this. But I don't want to just sit here and give you a list of things not to do. I think we all pretty much know that these things are wrong. So instead, I want to focus on things that we can do instead, right? So if we have the negative commandment of not to steal, what are some of the positive things implied within that? And so I have three things here that we're going to look at. And remember that as we look at, again, the reason behind these laws, not only just a list of things to do and not to do, but it's God showing us how we function best, right? The basis of society. He knows how we work, so we should do things his way. And also, it's revealing part of who God is. So with that being said, here's three positive things that we should be doing instead of stealing. And so the first one is honor other people's property, right? It's kind of, I was going to say surprising, but it's not. The rise in Marxism in America today. Marxism is the philosophy taught by Karl Marx, the principles behind communism and the larger umbrella term of socialism. It's been in the news a lot over the last decade as we had Bernie Sanders, who openly running for president in the Democratic primaries in both 2016 and 2020 as a democratic socialist, which, by the way, when you put democratic in front of it, it's still the same thing. It's still just socialism. But Marxism or socialism is essentially a worldview. It's a way of looking at the world. And the way that socialism looks at the world and the way that the Bible looks at the world don't really mix very well together. A lot of people try to claim that they do, but ultimately they don't. Despite the fact that socialism has never worked, there's some severe problems with it according to the Bible. One, it doesn't take into consideration sin nature, meaning, right, even the All of us are capable of greed and corruption, including the people that are responsible for distributing wealth. It views people as groups based on how much money you have or make, and race and sex and all of that kind of stuff, instead of as complex individuals capable of making your own choices. But the one that's most relevant to this is that Marxism fundamentally does not believe in private property. Right? According to Karl Marx and according to socialism, right, whatever you have does not ultimately belong to you. It belongs to society, it belongs to the collective, and therefore can be distributed according to as other people see fit. But again, I think the Bible actually makes a very solid argument for private ownership of property. Implied in the command of not to steal is the idea that it's not yours, right? And we see this kind of, you'll never see it laid out explicitly in the Bible, but the ideas are fundamental to most of the things that the Bible teaches, right? If it doesn't belong to you, you are not entitled to it. Now, a lot of people will point to Acts chapter 5, where it said that people were giving according to whoever had need, but that's something totally different. That's not the government taking everything and dispersing. That is individuals willingly giving up what they have in order to take care of the needs of their brothers and sisters. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But ultimately, again, if it doesn't belong to you, you can't take it, right? You don't have any ownership of something that belongs to other people. Right? Essentially, it comes down to the golden rule, right? What did Jesus say? Treat others the way we want to be treated, right? You have things, I'm sure, that you worked very hard for, that you are proud of, and they belong to you, and nobody else can take them away from you. And so the same belongs with, or the same thing is true for other people, right? The Bible says that we're supposed to love our neighbor, which means we need to respect them as individuals who are made in the image of God and have value because of that. And so if we're going to respect and value them, we need to respect and value the things that belong to them. But so often we have this mindset that because somebody else is more successful than me, then they're automatically a bad person. That's not true. Maybe they're just in a different season of life than you are. But we need to learn to celebrate other people's success, because their success does not necessarily mean that we failed. And that's a big one that I see today, is we look at people that are rich and think, oh, well, they must be a terrible person. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Why is that any of your problem? Right, so again, we need to treat others the way that we want to be treated. The second one, after honor other people's property, we need to work hard and be generous. The Bible actually has a lot to say about work. I could do an entire sermon just on the theology of work. A lot of people don't realize that work was actually given in the Garden of Eden before sin entered the world, which means that God made work as a good thing. And it says quite a bit about it. In Colossians 3:23, it says, whatever you do, work heartily for the Lord and not for men. 1 Thessalonians 4:11 says, and aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we were instructed. 2 Thessalonians 3:10 is one that gets quoted a lot. It says, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. Ephesians 4:28 says, and let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Right? So it says that we're supposed to work with our hands, and then we can have something to share with others in need. Right? So not only are we supposed to work, but we're also supposed to give generously to others. And again, the Bible has a lot to say about that, like 2 Corinthians 9:7. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Proverbs 19:17, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Right? So God's plan is that we are supposed to work. We're supposed to work hard. Right? And when we do that, right, there's something incredibly satisfying and rewarding about coming home after a hard day's work where you're exhausted, your hands are dirty, and you can look back on your day's accomplishments and say, I made this, right? This is everything that I accomplished today, right? So it gives us that sense of accomplishment. It gives us that sense of purpose. But then we're also contributing to society, right? You not only make yourself feel better, but you produce something that will make society better. You have either a good or a service that the people who receive that good or service will be better off because of it, right? So they're blessed because of it, and then in return, you get money. Remember that money is not the root of evil. The love of money is the root of evil, right? Money has no moral value to it. It's neutral. It's what we do with it. Right? But when we have money, we can not only take care of our families, but then we can also use that to help other people in need. Right? And so, again, not only we get this sense of gratification and accomplishment, but then we can use that to be a blessing to other people. Right? And there's this cycle that continues, right? You feel gratified, you get to bless other people, and this blessings just keep rolling. But that cycle also goes the other way. When we choose not to work, we become a drain on other people, and other people have to then take care of us, right? But the idea is that we need to give more than we receive, and we need to produce more than we consume, right? This is the way that God intended it, that we work hard so we can take care of ourselves, and then also so we can help other people. But when we choose to steal, when we choose to be a drain on other people, when we take what doesn't belong to us, we're failing to do both. We're not working as God intended us, and we're also not being generous as God intended us. And I think it's a fact throughout history that when unemployment goes up, theft goes up and crime goes up. Right? Because God created us to work. He created us to stay busy. He created us to do things and produce things, right? Just as God produces, right? God made us. He made everything we see, right? As image bearers, we are supposed to produce things and make things out of the creation that he has given us. And so the third and final thing, right? So we have honor other people's property, work hard and be generous. And then lastly, we need to trust God as our provider. The ancient Jews had a name for God. They called him Jehovah Jireh or Yahweh Jireh, depending on how you want to put that into English. But it means God our provider. And the first time we see this was in Abraham when he was on the mountain about to sacrifice Isaac, and then God provided a sacrifice for him, right? And he said, God is my provider. Right? Do we honestly trust that God is our provider? Now, that seems like a rhetorical question, and right, we're in church, so we're all going to say yes. But do we truly believe that? Right, look at what God promised the Israelites in Leviticus 26, verses 3 through 5. He says, if you walk in my statutes and obey my commandments and do them, then I will give you your rains in their season, and the land shall yield its increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last to the time of the grape harvest, and the grape harvest shall last to the time for sowing. And you shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land securely. Right? So if you're like me and don't know anything about farming, basically what he said there, he says, if you trust me, if you obey me, if you do what I ask you to do, I will provide your every need. I will take care of everything for you. We see in Philippians 4:19, which we read earlier, right? My God will supply every need of yours according to his riches in glory in Christ Jesus. Right? I love that verse because it says according to his riches. That's a lot. God owns the entire universe. Right? If your child were in need of something, I'm pretty sure you would do everything that you are able to do to help take care of them. Right? And God will do the same thing. Only what he's able to do is a whole lot more than what we're able to do because he is an infinite God. Also notice that he said he will supply your every need. He didn't say he'll supply your every want. Right? I don't have a Ferrari. Right? That's probably not going to happen. Right? God never promised that you're going to be a millionaire, but he did promise that he would take care of your every need. So often we we lose track of everything that God has done for us, right? Just if you're a Christian, just think of all the blessings that God has put on your life, right? First and foremost, that he sent his son to die on the cross for you when you were an enemy of his, right? That we could become his children. And then all of the ways that he's provided for you, all of the blessings that he's given you, think of how far he's brought you. You really think he's going to just abandon you now? Right? Obviously, when we put it in that sense, of course not. But when things get difficult, it's easy to forget that, right? It's easy to just think, well, if I just take matters into my own hands, like I don't think I'm going to have enough money to pay my bills this month. So maybe there's some corners that I can cut. Maybe there's some things, some obligations that I can just not follow through with. Maybe I can just take a little bit of something else. Right? What that says is that we don't trust God. And really what that says is that our view of God is not big enough. Right? God is big enough to supply your every need. God has promised that he will take care of you. Right? He's not going to let you starve. But we have to be big enough to trust that he is going to do that. So I think if we, right, implied in this commandment of do not steal, right? We need to value other people's property. We need to work hard, right? We need to put our effort in, right? If it's not right, I once heard the illustration that a lot of people, or faith is not leaning against your shovel expecting God to dig the hole for you, right? We still have to do our part, but then we need to trust that God is going to do his part. And God has not failed me yet. I think back of all the blessings that he has given me, right? Even just so many people in this church that have been a blessing to me, and just little things and in doing things for our family. And it's incredible to watch the way that God provides. But it's so easy as soon as things get difficult to think, oh, well, I have to do this on my own. No, you don't. You have a God who loves you and who is a provider and who just simply wants you to trust him. Doesn't mean things are going to be easy. It doesn't mean everything's going to happen in the time schedule that you want it to. But it does mean that God will provide for you. So we're going to switch things up right now, and we're going to move on to communion. So I'm going to have Tim and Mickey, if you would come forward at this time. So again, if